Uh, Hello everyone, hello new members. This is Sean Rayford, and I'll let him say about himself and his journey. Start now.
Good to go?
Yes.
All right. So my name's Sean. I graduated from this school in 2001. I worked at the Gamecock for like 9 or 10 semesters because I did it in the summer too. And I graduated in 4 years. And I worked at WUSC, and I really enjoyed those 2 experiences in student media probably the most of my time at school, and they were by far the most valuable. I didn't get a lot out of the classes, but I got out a lot of the newspaper and the radio station. So if you haven't taken advantage of either one of those, I encourage you to, because it's really fun. And the people that I met there, I'm probably better friends with than the people that I thought were my best friends when I was in school. For whatever reason, I guess we had a lot more in common. But anyway, so primarily, I'd call myself a photojournalist, but I do commercial work. And a lot of my, well, I'll just say it, the commercial work that I do, it basically allows me to be a photojournalist. There's really not enough of a market in this area for a full-time freelance photojournalist. And I work with everybody and their brother. I work with the Associated Press, and Getty Images, and the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, and NPR. And despite that, there's not enough work for a freelance photojournalist in this town. I mean, I'm second guessing that, but I don't think there is. So like a lot of artists in general, you do things within your genre that isn't specific to what you do so that you can do those things that you enjoy the most. And I enjoy photojournalism and documentary photography the most, by far. I guess the 2 biggest things is well, just the experiences of being there and seeing the things play out in front of you is a really big attraction. And when I was in high school and in college, I had I guess a strong interest in history, and I always have. And then at one point along this line of, you know, this journey, I kind of realized that I got to be there when history happened. And that was way, 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 way more interesting and cooler than reading about history. And like it kind of like clicked. Like the more and more I did it, and the more places that I went, and the more things that I saw, I got hooked. So I graduated in 2001, and I bartended at New Brooklyn Tavern over in West Columbia, which is a live music venue. Some of you may have been there, for like 12 years. And I freelanced as part-time because I had my days open. And I left there in 2015. So I've been doing it full-time since 2015. You mentioned that there might have been, I asked what you guys may have wanted me to talk about, and you mentioned something about like protest experiences.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I was curious about like all the experience, like recent like political events, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, like how did you like take photos through that, and all like the journey of you?
Okay.
Different places have different points of view.
I'll change this up. And I'll go to this crazy thing that happened that I went to. And I'm using Photo Mechanic. Anyone here use Photo Mechanic? Anybody? So Photo Mechanic is this really great application. It's pretty cheap actually too. and it allows you to organize your stuff. So anytime I edit any assignment and I'm going through and I'm selecting like my keepers and what I want, what I don't want, I use Photo Mechanic because it operates really fast. After that, I pull things into Lightroom and then I pull them back into Photo Mechanic. I got kind of off topic here, but this is kind of important, I guess. Photo Mechanic is cool because if you see down here, you got a little check mark. And so you can check photos and uncheck them, and you can color code them. So you can rank them. And when you're on a deadline, it's absolutely necessary to be able to take a bunch of photos and figure out what you want to go with. So I use that religiously, and I have for a while. And then it gives you a bunch of other information on the side too. And then the other thing about Photo Mechanic, I'm gonna say, I don't even know if this is right, so we're gonna try this. Oh, did it work? So this pulls up what's called the metadata. And one of the hardest parts of my job working with the Associated Press is filling out all these damn things. They don't fill out all of them. I'll show you one later what I have to do, and you have to do all. It's a real big pain in the rear end. In addition to having to write like a caption in specific AP style, and they're really nitpicky. Like so in my captions, when someone's dribbling a basketball, I'd say they dribble against. And recently, one of the picture desk editors told me it sounded like they were slobbering on something. So it's kind of really weird how specific certain entities can be, and they're all different. Like whenever I call up the AP photo desk after, I guess I'll say this. When I work with AP, I send one photo, and then I call up the desk up in New York, and there's like some guy up there or woman, and they're taking in all the photos and then making sure that the captions are right and everything's making sense before they publish them and put them on the wire. And that's an old, who knows what a wire photographer is, or a wire service. So that's, wire services are reports and text and photos that are produced for other entities to use. So they include the Associated Press, Reuters, Getty Images, and a bunch of others. And so when I work for AP or Getty, I'm taking photos for I don't know what yet. I might have an idea with some of the things, and the difference between AP and Getty is AP works with most all of your like local TV stations and local daily newspapers. Getty Images works with your magazines, your national TV stations, and your national newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and such. Being a photojournalist, and these aren't really captioned very well for this thing right here, but it's really important to put in some real basic information, just because when you're a photojournalist, and a journalist, one of your main roles is producing a first draft of history, because 50 years from now, when historians look what was going on at this time, they research through those entities. So it's important to just put some basic stuff in there and make sure you get that right. So I guess I'll go back to this crazy thing, because I'm sure maybe this might inspire some questions. This was in Charlottesville. What year was this? 2017. This was the Unite the Right rally. I saw that all these groups were getting together, and I was like, man, that's gonna be bad. And so I went up on my own and made some photos. It was supposed to start at noon or something like that, and it was a shit show by like 11:10, like an hour before it was supposed to start. And I remember like looking at someone and saying, "Man, it's not even supposed to start for an hour." Um, uh, but that day, I got up in the park, and I'm short, and I always try to get high ground. Um, Otherwise, I can't see what's going on, and I can't make good photos. And I also bring a ladder with me a lot, but not to things like this. So this photo ended up running in Time magazine. And then this is like kind of your typical thing, I guess, people fighting over flags and such. This guy on the base in the baseball helmet with the snot running out of his nose. He was I don't know what drugs he was on, but he was on a lot of them probably. He was just running everywhere, like just batshit crazy. His a white nationalist or racist has got like this is some like German Nazi dude's name on his arm, and that's one of the flags that you might not recognize, but maybe we should pay more attention to those types of flags in the future. This guy right here got punched by this dude who was like, he looked like he was like a professional fighter, and he had his hands all taped up, and he was holding like this cardboard sign that had some like World War II anti-Jewish slogan or something like that. He worked for Northrop Grumman, and of course was fired afterward. I think it was some defense contractor, and he ended up being fired once they figured out who that was. But this guy was just going up to, like, this guy went up to that guy that was like all like a professional fighter and was just like, bring it, come ahead and hit me. And then he stole that guy's flag and they started fighting over the flag. And this is kind of, I stood it on these like steps that were leading into the park for like a big portion of the time, because they all were coming down this street, and then that was like one of the main entrances. So they were just kind of coming by me. And a television news lady was next to me, and we were kind of like standing in these bushes so that people could come by and we weren't like blocking things. And at one point she looked at me and she said, "I think we're on the wrong side." And it was this, kind of weird moment, because like the white supremacists had that high ground, which was the park, and they came there to protest the removal of the statue that was there. And there were a lot of guns there that day. And they had radios, and they were organized, like we're hearing about what happened at the Capitol. And the police were just kind of standing there watching it, basically. They were really ill prepared. And the people that came and the groups, so there were all these white nationalist groups, and they would all come together. They would probably meet up kind of somewhat aware, and then they would walk from like different parts of the city to the park. And then the counter protesters would just meet them in the streets and fight. It wasn't like any other protest thing that I'd really been to, or it's like the people that came there to fight, and they were ready to do it. There's that guy in the blue again. And I went to a thing in Gainesville when Richard Spencer spoke, and he was in a Jeep later that day that shot at people. And I wasn't on the street when the car ran over people. And in fact, I didn't know that that had even happened until I got back to my Airbnb later. Anyone have any questions on what you just saw?
Is that the scariest protest you've ever been
It was just different. Like, I didn't feel threatened. That was at a point in time where the whole enemy thing wasn't as like prominent. Like on the day that the Capitol event in DC, I covered a smaller protest at the State House here, and I was followed around by Proud Boys the entire time. Like, they were same thing, like on radios, 3 or 4 of them the entire time, following me within like 5 feet, and that was really like unnerving. I covered protest in Charlotte after Keith Scott was shot. I think Keith Lamont Scott. And that was like 3 or 4 nights of kind of like crazy stuff. Like, one of my colleagues got punched in the face. I was on a street at one point where somebody came up to me and they demanded to know, what I was doing out there. And I guess my answer was right. And it was something of the nature is that I was a photojournalist, and my job and role was to document things that go on in the world. And that's what I was out there doing. There was like an incidence of looting. People were breaking into a jewelry store there. And at one point, somebody pointed me and said, "No pictures." I just went somewhere else because there was crazy stuff happening everywhere. It's funny, you asked me of the scariest thing. The scariest thing was when I covered a flood, actually. Not because of the flood, but because of the people in a neighborhood who didn't like the fucking media around here. And at first they thought I was a looter because they saw, it was down in Florida near Jacksonville after Hurricane Irma. And they saw my out of town plates and he's a looter, and I was just like, no, I'm a photojournalist. I showed them my ID, and I had a bunch of stuff that I had pulled out of my car, like it was like waders, and to get to my waders, I had all this other shit. So I was in this position where I couldn't just like get in and leave, and one of the neighbors had to pull that guy off of me. That was probably the scariest thing, despite the fact that I was also threatened to be shot that day or the day before because I didn't work for Fox News. The only ones who support the president. I didn't really take that guy all that seriously, but at the same time, it was what it was, and he had a gun. He was retrieving his gun out of the flood, which is what happens a lot in floods. People go out to their houses and they remove their valuables. One of the things that's valuable, you definitely don't want stolen, is your guns. I was down in Socastee, South Carolina, near Myrtle Beach, just 2 weeks ago, and this guy had a paddle boat. He had like 20 guns in that paddle boat that he was pushing out. But he was really cool. Like, he invited me in his house. No, I mean, that's the thing, is like, you never know what you're gonna get into. And when I go, I really enjoy, it sounds weird, I really enjoy covering floods for multiple reasons. But one of them is that typically people tend to be better than they normally are. When there's a natural disaster, they tend to look out for each other a lot more. And so you see people like helping each other out. And for the most part, in those situations, people are appreciative and glad to see me, because they're like, oh, someone's taking interest in this crazy park thing that I'm experiencing right now, and my whole town might need some help. And so typically, you get people who they're like, yeah, come in my home, like take any photos you want. There's 3 inches of water in it right now. Uh, any other questions while I think about what else I can say? I'll get you next.
So what's the process for like finding an event or like location to shoot at? Will you like seek it out yourself, or will like the news organizations tell you where to go?
So again, the better journalist you are, the more you find stuff out first. And so when I first started shooting with a lot of the folks that I shoot with, it was just them calling me. And then I started figuring out like, oh, this is national news, or this is local news. This is who I need to approach on this. And then, you kind of build a network. Twitter's good for like building a network of like, I have like Columbia SC news lists. And so, I check that to try to stay up to date about what's going on. I read a lot of newspapers and I spend a lot of money on newspaper subscriptions, because I think it's important to do, but also like I need it. So now I don't know if it's half and half, but now it's to the point where I'm oftentimes seeing things that are happening in my area before my editors in New York are, because I'll like during the political primary season, like I pay attention to when candidates visit my state, because it pops up in all the newspapers as soon as they announce. And so I'll typically see that first, and I'll email who I want to work with first and just pitch them like, hey, this event's going on, do you need coverage? And I kind of have like some a hierarchy of who I want to work with based upon multiple things. Some of them, so when I shoot with Getty, that's work for hire, I don't own copyright to those photos. If somebody comes at me later and wants to buy them from me, I have to send them to Getty. There's certain things I can do with them based upon the contract that I signed, like I can use them in a book or like a exhibition. Hunted for that word for a minute because I don't do very many of those. You shoot with the New York Times, you retain your copyright to that. Of course, if you shoot things for your own, like I did in Charlottesville, you can do whatever you want with them, and you have the ability to command and send out those photos. And it was really interesting because that first photo that I showed you ran in Time magazine. And then this photo ran in like a small weekly paper in which I knew somebody used to work in Columbia at like the Free Times. And they saw that I was there and shot that. And he was like, hey, can we buy one of those photos? And of course, like that was kind of small and that wasn't as cool as Time magazine, but I ended up winning like a Virginia Press Association award for that photo. And so yeah, I think I explained. Did I explain and probably answer more? And that's I'm gonna get to you in a second. That I'm gonna touch on something that's really important. If you have any interest in photography being a source of income, it's insane. And it can be a real mental health issue because at this point in society, there's like Wild West on photo theft. And everyone at this point is conditioned into not paying. So I get requests out the wazoo on people asking me for my work for free. And it ranges from like nonprofits, like tourism, like city tourism boards, and you probably see it all the time, like on Instagram. Like there's like the City of Columbia Tourism Board, like they'll be like, hey, we love your photo. Can we use it here on Instagram? And you've got people that that get paid. It's their job to go out and ask people for free photos. And then you end up having to also work with those people too. And it can be like, it can put a lot of stress on your relationships with people that you work with, people that you know, and your friends, because they don't understand why you want to preserve the value of your work. And quite honestly, the more that people give stuff away, the less photography is worth. I mean, even like recently when I was down in near Myrtle Beach, like the Weather Channel messaged me and like, hey, we want to use your stuff. And it's like I started talking about like, you know, well, okay, like let's figure out how I can get paid. I'm available tomorrow too. This is still going on. And then they just ghosted me. And it happens a lot. And so you go from this process of responding to people and trying to work with them, and then they just like, oh, never mind. And you might spend like your time and effort communicating with those people, and then they just walk away when it comes time to talk about like paying you for it. And sometimes you're out making photos and doing work, and people are messaging you to try to get stuff for free. And then you might discuss getting paid for it, and then they walk away and you're like, God damn it, I should have just been making photos during that time. And I've gotten to the point now where I've just had to start just ignoring a lot of stuff and not responding to people. And I think I'll eventually get just like a new, or I guess I'm struggling for the word here, but a regular response that I have that just says, I don't have time for this. But it's absolutely insane. And people will congratulate you for companies wanting to use your stuff for free. So I'll be like, my mom will be like, oh, congratulations on the Weather Channel asking me. And I was like, no, they just wanted my stuff for free, Mom. And some people think that's great. You know, like if you're like Joe Schmo and you take a photo of something interesting and ABC wants it, you're like, oh, look at it, you know, like cool. And you know, that's fun and cool, but like it's for a working photographer, it's insane. And the mental health aspects of having to explain to people over and over again that what you do has value is tough. You had a question.
Yeah, like in an environment like this, it's very rapid and like how do you sort of infuse, you know, like what take, like you said, what pictures do you make pictures like where you're looking at?
So like that guy in the blue, like you can kind of tell, you know, like who instigate, like in that situation, like who might be an instigator because they stand out. And like his in so many photos, like I have hundreds and hundreds. I probably have 200 photos of that guy that day because he was everywhere and all over the place. And then of course, you know, the guy with the shirt off and a swastika, you know, that tells a story. And probably to answer your question, same thing, like with that tells a story too, because there's some context there, like with words and symbols, you can incorporate to help tell the story. My first, I guess, big job was after the Charleston massacre, and it was a really, really simple photo outside the State House where the U.S. and the South Carolina flag were at half mast, and the Confederate flag at the time out front was just flapping in the breeze there. And you know, there's certain things that you can use, backgrounds. And so like, I'll get out and I'll be like, okay, that's a good background. When something happens, that needs to be in the background. Signs help, but don't take pictures of signs. Does that make sense? Use the signs as a helper to something else that's going on. And the symbols. I think that's it. Is that a Seth? Is that a palmetto tree on that guy's helmet? I can tell a little bit better. I don't know. As you can see here, like, I'm not photographing signs, but there's action going on and signs in the background that tell the story. Does that answer your question?
What camera do you use, and like how much equipment do you bring to something like this where you're constantly moving around?
So I recently switched from Nikon to Sony. I shot Nikon from like 96 to a few months ago. And I would typically, I don't know what well, it says probably right here what I shot this on. So I shot this on an a Nikon D810. So I had probably a 24 to 70 millimeter lens. And at this time, and for the most part of when I shot Nikon, I carried one camera body on me, because I had an 850 and an 810 as my last bodies, and I never had the same two bodies. And typically I enjoyed using one way more than the other, and they had controls that were different. And so like, you know, like the positions of the buttons. And so I would go from one to the other and I would get confused. And I've been shooting so long with the Nikon system that I had these really good muscle memories on like changing out lenses, and I could do them like really fast. And so I would carry a 70 to 200 and then like a 24 to 70 or a 16 to 35. Just I'd have one wide and one, and I typically I use like a harness. I don't know if that's the right word, and a belt. And I have little bags on the sides. I don't wear a book bag like a backpack because that gets in the way when it's crowded. And you can't tell if someone's like doing shit to your bag. If you're in a crowded situation, you're not gonna know. I've seen people like in protests, like just rip patches and stuff off and like steal flashlights off of like militia guys. And they never even knew. Because it's so crowded and everyone's touching you. And so now I shoot Sony, and those damn things twist out in opposite directions, and the release is in a different spot. And after like 2 weeks, I dropped a really expensive lens, and I was like, oh God, I gotta get two bodies. So now I shoot on a Sony A9 and a